is so intelligent or has a
Well,
consciousness that exceeds all of
here,
humanity.
you know, I'll go like step by step.
Okay.
If you're saying that the property that makes it okay to kill some beings and not others is the ability to reciprocate, then as long as we don't have the trait ability to reciprocate in the organism, we could scale something like its sentient experience up infinitely, and it would, in your view, have to be okay to kill that thing because it doesn't possess that property that you're saying you care about.
Sure, but what can you tell me what I would disagree with here?
Well, it seems to me like you probably wouldn't want to kill a being that's infinitely more sentient than the totality of humanity just because it can't reciprocate the social contract.
Well, why not? If I don't value that
See, he arbitrarily isolates qualities without establishing their deeper connection. What are the implications infinite sentience has for a social contract? You cannot just arbitrarily separate those things and ignore their deeper connection. It's like someone who says, okay, what if there was a human who had the body of a gorilla? But there are all sorts of implications that would have that you're not accounting for. This is why, like, infinite worlds theory is stupid. Well, it's just that the laws of nature would be different. Even if, hypothetically, they would be different, what you're effectively saying is that all of the laws of nature within this hypothetical universe you're positing would literally revolve around the arbitrary fact of human head, gorilla body. Because let's just grant you your hypothetical. Then that would have implications for everything else. And you can keep tacking on arbitrary qualities and say, well, this, but then you would have to establish how they can be reconciled. And the manner by which they're reconciled would also have unintended implications, right? So you can keep doing this as long as you want, but ultimately you fail to justify why this universe would center around this arbitrary thing you created. You know what it reminds me of? So we talked about Christine Chan, right? Remember Christine Chan, guys? Christine Chan. Let me give you some lore about Christine Chan. Since it's all on the internet anyway, right? Christine Chan has an idea called Sonichu, right? Sonichu is a combination of Sonic the Hedgehog and Pikachu. And Christine Chan created a fantasy world revolving around this character, Sonichu, right? And literally a parallel universe. That's what they call it. This entire universe revolves around the arbitrary fact that for some reason Sonic and Pikachu have to be combined. Now, why? Never is it actually addressed why they actually have to combine. But the entire universe they create revolves itself around this one arbitrary act. It's almost a form of heresy, okay? It's almost a form of heresy because what you're basically creating like a god. You're creating an absolute point of being around which all beings adjust their being to. You're creating an absolute being around which an entire universe owes its rational structure to. And this guy, ask yourself, does the exact same thing with his hypotheticals. He does the same shit. He does the same, because these people don't understand there are consequences for what you're saying that you're not taking into account. This is why these people are not Hegelians. You can tell they've never read any Hegel, because a Hegelian would very easily be able to understand that this is a high point of fucking sophistry and stupidity.
Sentience. I don't even know if I believe in sentience, but let's say that I do. If I don't value that sentience at all, and also I guess like to be clear here, like I would regard these acts as morally neutral. So I wouldn't necessarily, because a lot of people seem to think that I'm like advocating for people to go out and murder animals or murder other life forms.
Yeah, ask yourselves hypotheticals and Sonichu are literally on the same level. They are literally on the same level. Is sentience the realm of belief? Look, people are going to use this word called sentience and try and make you think that it means something, but it doesn't. Words like sentience and consciousness, when they're used in these contexts, don't actually mean anything. You can try and define what makes human beings different from animals all you want. And you can create a line, right? But that line is always going to be arbitrary. Because ultimately, the real difference, the objective difference, rather than the form you give to that difference, is always going to be actively suspended in reality, actively unfolding and developing in reality itself. It's never something you're going to be able to reduce to some kind of line. These people have a really fucked up and skewed philosophical and ontological view of the world. The battles of what?
All the time. Like, I would regard the act to be morally neutral.
You know what, Gaga? Because I watched that documentary back in 2014, I actually have a very consistent and coherent, complete understanding of Christine Chan. At least so far as what I understood. I understand the structure of their fantasy, the entire thing. I understand the idea they have that the world is going to merge with the world of cartoon fiction or whatever. The merge, whatever it's called. I actually understand all of it. And a lot of people just dismiss it as like, oh, this is just like incoherent ramblings. Well, I admit it's definitely an indication of a deep mental illness. There is actual structure to this that you can make sense of from a psychoanalytic perspective. You should do a stream explaining it one day. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could actually. I don't know if it would be allowed because psychoanalysis is very controversial. And specifically, like, yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to because let's just say it would piss some people off. Can't claim it isn't consistent. Well, not just that it's consistent, but I understand the pathology. I understand why they hold these beliefs. Like in a way, in a sense, it makes sense. It makes sense. Streaming in Discord VC. Yeah, I mean, well, I'll just give you a hint, right? So there's this idea of a merge, right? That our world is going to merge with the world they created, right? The Sonichu universe. They have created an eschatology, an actual eschatology. And by the way, if you don't know what eschatology means, it means like some kind of end of times, some kind of teleology approaching an end of times, a final moment, right? They have transported their fundamental relationship to their fantasy of the Sonichu universe, trying to arrive at its, treating it as though it is an actual, immediate, and real presence in their life. They have transposed that into an eschatology where it will literally merge with the real world. Because for them, what we call in psychoanalysis the world of the imaginary is synonymous with the real. They do not draw a distinction between the imaginary. They're unable to draw a distinction between the imaginary and the traumatic real of drives. So for let's say a typical neurotic subject, the imaginary and the real are mediated via the symbolic order. But here we're clearly dealing with someone for whom the signifier is foreclosed. So you have this very terrifying and disturbing relationship between the world of the imaginary and the real, which they themselves kind of interface with in the form of this fantasy that their specific fantastical their specific fantasy is going to actually become real in the world. What do you mean by foreclosed? Don't worry about it. It's just some psychoanalytic stuff that's hard to explain. But the way I'd simplify it is that let me give you an example of this, right? So we all have fantasies. Each and every one of you have a fantasy. For example, I may like the character Mario, right? No, I'll explain it. I might like the character Mario, right? But for most people, Mario is still something in Mario is fundamentally estranged from me. There is a barrier between me and Mario that I know I will never overcome. I'll never overcome that barrier. Mario doesn't exist. I can't feel Mario. I'm not meant to feel Mario. Mario is just some imaginary idea that's beyond me, right? That's how normal people think. In their case, though, which comes from childhood to the extent that I'm aware of it, their Sonichu character, for example. Okay, let me explain it like this. Most of our fantasies we do not take to be literally real. There's a fundamental separation between us and our fantasies. So it can be in our ideal self. It could be stories we tell ourselves to cope. We all understand there's a fundamental, irreconcilable chasm between us and that. And it's actually a deepened sense of that chasm that is the symbolic order in psychoanalysis. It is the deeper structure of that chasm that is the symbolic order. But for someone like Christine Chan, who share a similar, I don't know what you would call it, psychological state, that chasm doesn't exist. So when they imagine Sonichu, they imagine it as something to be grasped immediately, something to be united with immediately. They refuse to accept this kind of chasm. It's an immediate and real presence. It's an immediate and real presence. So for them, their fantasy cannot only be a fantasy. It has to actually be real. And the way they kind of relate to that is through this kind of idea of the merge. There's going to be an actual merge. How does that justify anything? It doesn't justify anything. I'm just trying to explain to you why they have this idea there's going to be a merge. They have the idea there's going to be a merge because they do not have a sense of the I'll call it like this. This person does not have a sense of the unwritten and unconscious structure of a being. They're unable to intuit things. They're unable to understand the things that can't be made explicit. So you believe that they're mentally ill? Maybe that's a loaded... I mean, yes, not only because of this, but that's the description Lacan gives to psychosis, okay? They are fundamentally not in reality. No, on the contrary, most of us possess a pretty measured distance from reality. We have the privilege of not always having to experience reality. We can mediate our reality through our fantasies and our copes and our ego. But for them, reality is something terrifyingly real. and always immediate and proximate. All the time. I think that's the difference. Is this the real I keep hearing about? Yeah. I think I'm trying to say this shit because it's like, I really think that the people who have been stalking this person have been extremely irresponsible. You know, they find all of everything about them extremely ridiculous. Well, that's the obvious part. Obviously, it's very abnormal and it's ridiculous. But clearly, this person is suffering from. Clearly, it means something different to them. Clearly, they fundamentally cannot see it from how you're seeing it. You know. It's like, oh, this is so ridiculous. This guy thinks that Sonichu is real. Well, you have to understand that in a way, like your sense of normal is responsible for that in a way, right? Like why like this is Lacan's fundamental position, by the way. It's precisely our sense of normal that is responsible for psychosis. And the line between normal and psychosis is not as thick as you'd think. And I think America, this is a country where we are experiencing mass psychosis as we speak. I mean, this is the beautiful irony too. Isn't the obsession with Christine or whatever that the stalkers have had a form of psychosis in and of itself? Isn't this precisely the structure of their psychosis, the path they have taken to their psychosis? They have arbitrarily elevated this character, this person, to the status of absolute being around which the entire world, the entire structure of their fantasy has revolved around. They have organized their entire life dedicated to stalking and being obsessed with this person. So for Lacan, a neurotic, normal person is not necessarily superior to a psychotic. Rather, for Lacan, in order for a neurotic to avoid psychosis, they have to undergo a more profound process. He calls it subjective destitution, that finally allows the subject to recognize that the chasm that separates a subject from their fantasy is not the result of some kind of external obstacle imposed upon them, but is an actual feature of reality itself. I'll just end it there, and we'll continue the debate.
Neutral. So I mean, if this is something that yielded like a great benefit to the rest of mankind or something, I mean, I would even argue that even if this wasn't sentient, that this would be morally wrong to kill us. Like it would be morally wrong to destroy the atmosphere, even though the atmosphere isn't sentient or anything.
You know what's fucking crazy? When you get me going about Lacan, I just can't shut up. I just fucking, you know what I mean? When you get me going about this topic, I will fucking talk a lot about it. And I think the reason I do that is just because I don't know. I've spent so much of my life studying it and understanding and mastering Lacan's system, I guess. So I just can't shut up about it when you get me going.
Yeah, I would argue that probably